did you say you started out a couple of years ago singing more seriously?
No, actually, a little over 2 years ago. I would say two. It's less than 2.5 years ago. I literally started singing like from. I think it was, yeah. It's a little over 2 years ago. Yeah, and like right now it's May. So yeah, you can say it's 2.5 years. It's 2.5 years. So yeah.
Ah, cool. Because you have, I'm assuming you've done some music stuff before this though, because the first thing I spoke to you about in email was this your ability to tell me what pitches I'm singing without any reference. And I was interested in a like how you developed that, where it came from, and all that stuff. Like, do you want to maybe give us a bit of background on all that?
So as you so I started singing like a little over two. So let's say 2.5 years ago, right? Back in like 2013, 2014, around that time, I used to do a lot of bodybuilding, and at the same time, I would play guitar. And I was like very new at it. I just like bought the guitar and stuff, and I started playing. And I wasn't really that good at it. I was pretty amateur at it. I just learned a few chords here, some modes like Mixolydian, Dorian, and whatnot. And then eventually, I sort of lost the patience and eventually guitar. So that was pretty much about. That's the only musical background I had. I actually never have taken any music lessons in my school because it's actually not that much available over here. It's a little bit different here. So yeah, I mean, and honestly, I was like growing up as a kid. I mean, like I was into sports and computer gaming. Like I was into those kinds of things. I wasn't much of like a musical person, so to speak. And it's like so I started bodybuilding around like 2014, right? So like I did bodybuilding for about 2 years, and then I ended up hurt during a PR in deadlift, so I had to stop doing the lift. So I was like, hey, you know what? I have to find a new hobby. And then all of a sudden,
Hang on
something
a sec.
just
Did you
go
say
ahead, go ahead.
bodybuilding?
Yeah, bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Yes,
Ah,
yes, you
okay.
did that before, but not anymore,
I tell you.
unfortunately, because I hurt my back, so I had to
Ah,
let that
okay.
go. But
So you were doing
yeah,
it.
and so
You,
after that ended, I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I should give a try at singing. And then people, around me, they were like, you cannot learn to sing. I mean, it's something you're either born with or you're not. And I was like, oh, really? And then I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe I should just go ahead and give it a try, see what happens, just for fun. And I remember like I would try to sing a few songs here, and then I would like stray badly. Like you have no idea. Like veins would pop out. The tone was absolutely horrible. I actually have a video. I was gonna email it to you, but I couldn't find it. But I found it right now. And this is like about a year ago. And like if it's okay, I can actually show it over here so that you can see how I used to sound just a little over a year ago.
yeah, man.
And
Go
it
ahead.
was like, yeah.
Go
So
ahead. Go ahead. Play the
about perfect pitch.
play the video, and then we'll to go back to perfect pitch. Yeah, you
Yes, yes.
fitted a
So
bunch in there. So
basically, yeah. So basically, like I would see all these videos on YouTube, right? Like Singing Success, Phil Mufarich, Marnell Temple, and they would all use an instrument, right? And for me, it's like I actually didn't even know that there's a thing called perfect pitch existed because like I would just hear a note and I could tell it like ooh that's like a D, like a little flat there, and I can just like tell it right there, right at an instant. But and I never thought about it, and then all of a sudden, a few people were like, how do you do that? Like how do you like recognize pitch? And I was like, what do you mean? And then they were like, well, you're not using any reference to the pitch. And I'm like, oh, really? Oh, so, and then they were saying something like, oh, I think you have perfect pitch. I'm like, perfect pitch, what's that? So I started looking it up online, and apparently it's like something you sort of developed at a very early age. And like I watched Rick Vito's video, and apparently like he has a kid, and he has perfect pitch. And he also made a video on that you cannot develop perfect pitch as an adult, which sort of bothered me a little bit because I mean I never had any musical influence. I never sang in my entire life. Like you can talk to anybody over here, my mom, dad, my family, and they can all vouch for it. And I honestly never thought about it. It just sort of like came up to me. But I would say that when I used to play guitar, like I would memorize scales, like I would know the notes like in C major, C minor, and I would play chromatic scale and whatnot. And I'm not sure whether that has to do with that, even though it was not that wild. It's not like I played guitar like when I was 8 years old or 9 years old. So it's kind of hard to tell how it developed that. But it sort of came naturally to me, if I'm being honest with you. It just sort of came naturally to me. And I never thought about it until people started like, telling me that, oh, I think you have perfect pitch, perfect. I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. So yeah, I guess that sort of
When
wraps it around. So
so
yeah.
when you distinguish between pitches, what differences do you hear? So let me ask you this. I mean, I've got some understanding of this because I went into it years ago. This guy called David Lucas Burge who does some courses on relative pitch and perfect pitch, and I sat down with a lot of that stuff and kind of went through it a little bit. I got a little way along, but I started to realize it was going to be a lot of work, and I kind of balanced out like how much is this going to benefit me in the long term, like versus the investment of time it was going to take. But a lot of the things that I was that he was getting you to focus on were quite, kind of very subtle in the tones, and you really had to like get into the right mindset to kind of hear this with open ears, I guess you'd say, like but let me I kind of just wanted to ask you, like, in a basic sense, like if you could maybe explain to people like what is it that is the difference between hearing like one pitch over another. Like, is there any way you can kind of verbalize it, or is it just I kind of just feel it's different? Is there anything you can kind of any way you can explain it a little bit?
Some people, like, they can identify notes through songs. It's like they hear a note and they're like, has that kind of note in the chorus or in the verse. I'm not sure whether I sort of do that, but for me it's like I hear the note and it's like there. You know what I mean? It's like I can hear the note and know. And sometimes I go to YouTube and watch these videos, like these lyric videos that people make. Like there's this one video, "Thinking Out Loud" by Ed Sheeran, right? And there's this lyric video, and it's not in tune, and I can hear that it's like a little sharp, and it bothers my ear. It's like, oh man, something is off. And what's interesting is that like there's this guy, Charlie Puth. You actually made a video about him, right? Charlie Puth, you call him Charlie Puth. So he actually has he actually has perfect pitch too, right? And I watched this video with Larry King, like he had an interview, and like he tells people that he can hear when kids are screaming. He can hear those notes, or like shoe squeak, or like door squeaking and whatnot. And what I can totally relate to all of these things, literally. And if something is off, like in musical term, in music, if something is a little bit off, I can hear that, and it actually bothers me. It's like, oh man, it doesn't feel right, man. You gotta tune that up. And what's another thing that's interesting is that I was watching this video of Rumi, like a YouTuber Rumi, and like he did a test with some of his friends, and he was like they're all musicians, right? They're professional musicians doing this perfect pitch test, and they were struggling to hit the notes. I'm like, oh man, why is that happening? So I was like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and give the test. And like it's already on my YouTube channel, right? And I hear the note, boom, hear the note, boom, hear the note, boom. It just comes naturally. I mean, that's probably the best way I can like define my perfect pitch. But I've seen and I've heard that people can develop their absolute pitch to a very, very high level, like very close to perfect pitch. And honestly, it doesn't really matter whether you have perfect pitch or not. It really doesn't matter that much. I mean, as long as you can sing in tune, it's all that truly matters. Now, a lot of people tell me that, oh, you have perfect pitch, that's why you're so good at runs. No, I was bad. I didn't even know that there is a thing called riffs and runs existed until I actually came across Rashid Hayek's channel on YouTube, and I was like, whoa, what is he doing? Like, what is this? Is this like natural? I mean, like, whoa, like going up and down notes and whatnot. So I was like, hey, you know what? Okay, I'm gonna work on scales, but this time I'm gonna work on major and minor pentatonic scales because most runs are based on that. So I was like, yeah, oh, sorry, yeah, and I started working on those eventually, and then I came up with some Vine videos, where they would do like a sort of intermediate beginner level runs, and I would do them slowly, 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 and eventually it just sort of got better and better and better, and then from there it's sort of like I was like, oh, you know what, I got interested into R&B music and soul and pop, so I started listening to Brand McKnight and whatnot, and sort of drifted a little bit away from pop because that's sort of what I started with, like pop music and whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with pop music, but now I just feel like R&B is more cool, and it's more sort of like fun to listen to. It's more emotional, more soulful, and that's how sort of like That's the route I'm going. So
Nice,
yeah.
man. Well, it's good to find a style that draws you in and that you want to work at, because ultimately, I think most singers are going to have to find some kind of niche to fit into, because the best singers typically are pretty specialized. And if you put a lot of time into R&B, there are a lot of broad skills that singers need regardless of the style. But then obviously in R&B, there's a lot of things that you need that you don't need in other styles. And the more that you broaden out everything, you end up compromising the style you want to sing in a lot of the time. I liked earlier on when you were talking about that people said, oh, you can't really learn to sing, and how you took that as motivation. Like, a lot of my motivation has come from like my just stubbornness of like, I'm going to show people that you can get good at this. Like, and
Totally.
people's attitude about it. If you took up like bodybuilding or something else, normally they'll be like, they'll see there's a way forward. But with singing, people don't see that necessarily, and it's nice to have that mindset going into it of, I can just get better at this like anything else, really. That wasn't where I started as a singer. I remember, and I mentioned this in a video I did about some records I used to listen to recently. When I went into singing initially, my view was literally like, you're born with a voice and that's it, full stop, like black and white. That was my view, and it took me a while to transition into, I can actually get better at this. Now, for me, that was probably easier than most, because my start point was so low that I had to jump off that train. I think for some natural singers, their start point, I say natural, some singers that develop early and sing pretty well from a young age, their start point's pretty high. And I think because of that reason, it can work against them sometimes. It's like, it's hard for them to jump off that train because they've had a lot of success, and it feels good to be, one of the guys that got it easy. So they tend to grow less as singers, but they start at a higher point, versus, if you start at the bottom, it's like, either you're going to have to just say, okay, I suck and I'll always suck, and you just give up, or you've got to find out a way, how am I going to get better at this? It gives you no other option. So there are benefits to being, a singer like myself. When I started, it's like, you just have to jump on the other train, like you have to try something else. Also, you mentioned the video, but you haven't played it. Have you got the video to play? You said about a video you did a couple of years ago.
Yes, I got it right.
And
Just
I
give
will
me like
put
a
a
second.
yeah, take your time, it's fine. I will put a link in the description to your channel so people can go to see like your journey and where you're at the minute. One thing that
Sure, man, sure. That would be awesome.
yeah,
So this is the video. Okay. It crossed my heart and hope to die. Put my lungs and curse my eyes. I lost control and don't want it back. Going numb, I've been hijacked. It's a fucking drag. Yeah, I tell you on my lips and I can't get rid of you. So I say down your kiss and your apple. So you can tell by the tone that it's very like distorted. The vowels are completely focused. You can see my neck squeezing, all the veins popping out. I'm looking up for the high notes. It's like everything is so off. And what's interesting is that like at the beginning of the video, I was literally saying in the video that working on resonance and stuff. After I got introduced to Singing Success, even your channel, as well as Film for It, and a couple of other channels, Marnell Sample. So like I thought that I was getting there, but I was not. It's like the problem with every beginners is that like they hear something and then they do it, they just don't respond, perfectly, or I shouldn't say perfectly, or well at least. And that's the beauty of natural singers. It's like they hear something and they can imitate that, just like really well, to the point that it sounds pleasing. It's very balanced. The compression level is balanced. So there's even split of resonance and whatnot, so they're not yelling or being too heady and whatnot. And all of these things, I just didn't understand back then. And what's more interesting is that around that time I would like really go into like forums and whatnot. I would read, I would do research and whatnot. And to be completely honest with you, that was actually throwing me off, because all I was doing was learning, but I was actually not applying anything to my voice. And then at a certain point, I was like, hey, you know what? This is just not working out. Maybe I should just let that go and just focus on my voice. And what's interesting is that this is probably, you're not going to believe that, but I started watching your videos about compression back from like 2014 videos, and you would compression and evenness. And that's when I started focusing on that. And I noticed that I would actually start yelling right around B3, C4. So it's actually below the passage. Right around the I would start yelling a little bit. And by the time I would get up to like an F4, F sharp 4, it's completely off. I was yelling and everything is like so off. So I was like, oh, so that's my problem. So I have to work on that. So I started working on that. I started working, like, it's like even before that, I got to the point where it would hurt just talking, like literally talking to people. It would hurt like really badly. I was like, okay, you know what? This is just not working out. So I took like, a month break, like literally a month break. Like I went to a doctor and they told me, I actually went to 4 ENT doctors in total, right? And you know what the first ENT doctor told me? That your vocal cords are fine. Your vocal cords are fine. You just have acid reflux. And that's what they told me. Like basically the 3 doctors told me that, until I went to the 4th doctor, which is probably one of the best doctors over here at the moment. And he performed a laryngoscopy, a nasal laryngoscopy. And that's when he told me that you have, spasmodic dysphonia. And that's the first time somebody told me that I have dysphonia, because before that I suspected that I had that, but nobody could identify it. Even there was one doctor who told me that I have to get rid of my tonsils out, because there's infection in tonsils. That's why it's causing my voice vocal issues. And I'm like, tonsils? I mean, like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I have literally issues here. And so it was tough. It was pretty tough, man. So, yeah.
When I listen to that video, though, there's a lot of good stuff going on. I mean, all I'm hearing there is just a lack of release as you go up higher, and that's why it kind of hits a bit flat at times, but that's something that's not so hard to fix, really. And I mean, that's like 2 years ago, but sometimes, I mean, I find that singers, they have this sense of where they start, and I have this where I talk about, how difficult it was for me at the start, but as I've taught more and more and more, I really have a sense of like how different some people's starting point can be, and it can be pretty crazy. Like I'll have some students and they can just basically do what they want, and they've always been able to do it, and they're like, yeah, I just use my voice. They've never thought about it at all. And then vice versa, others who are like struggling and they can't get around it, and it's like, oh my word, how do I figure this out? And this to me is like super interesting, just because of where I started and how I wanted to progress as a singer. It can be mind-boggling, and as you teach more, it's like you get this broader picture of singers that I think is you get less of when you're just on your own working at it. Where do you feel like? Because one thing that I wanted to talk to you about today and just kind of go into was the way that you're learning to sing and the way you're coming up through YouTube and stuff and all this is so different to when I started. I mean, when I started, YouTube wasn't a thing, and there wasn't teachers, putting out a lot of like really transparent type of content. There was really just Seth Riggs videos that I found, and they were kind of hidden in a little corner of the internet. I found a couple of masterclasses, and then from there, over a period of about 3 or 4 years, I got kind of lucky because Singing Success Online came around after about 2 years, which was like gave me the ability to watch like Brett and Shelby and Jesse Nemitz, who was teaching there at that time, like all those guys like teaching students how to sing. which was really the first resource of that kind. But now I think, and you can kind of enlighten us on this. Now I feel like it's the opposite problem for singers. Is there's so much information when they're learning, and you did talk about this a little bit with the forum stuff you mentioned. It's like how do you filter out like the good from the not so good, from the average, from the bad information? Because frankly, like, you know, the best information, there's not that much of it, relatively speaking, and as you go down you get more and more of the average or worse information. How are you finding like navigating that minefield? Like how have you found like the people that you think, okay, like this guy's got something great, this guy's got something great, and drawing from it? Like, is there any tips you can give singers at the beginning right now who are kind of coming onto YouTube and trying to find help?
So basically, like, as you were saying that, there are so many informations out there, and it's very hard to filter them out. And for me, like, when I started, like, I would look up to a lot of singing success videos. But what was interesting is that, they would do a lot of lip trills, tongue trills, and whatnot. And I would also watch Eric Arsenault's video. And I would notice that, Eric Arsenal, like, he has one of these videos, like, he would do a lip bubble and then he would open up to like a very clean head voice. Whereas I would try to do it and I would just get into falsetto, like a disconnected falsetto, like instead of I didn't even understand that coordination, because some people would say head voice and falsetto literally have the same coordination. One is breathy, one is not, and then, singing success would say that pianissimo than a falsetto or disconnected falsetto, and that was very confusing at first. But and that was hard. Like, I'm not gonna lie, that was really hard. And I would just go into falsetto, and it was not getting me anywhere. And in fact, it was actually making my voice even worse. Like, it would like scratch, like it would get very dry, and it would hurt. Also, like, even singing in falsetto, it would actually hurt. But I didn't understand that. How do you get chord closure up in your head voice, or pianissimo? How to get that? I didn't understand that. So what I did was, I took my range down. So, like, I was like literally in like, from C3 to C4. That's all I was working on. I would do nays, mums, and bobs and whatnot. And then after working on it, I realized that I found something happened right around like C4, C sharp 4. I found like there's like a tilt happening, like, like shift of resonance. That's when I first experimented on it, because it's like it's telling it one thing versus experimenting yourself. That's like a completely different thing. And once I started feeling, I'm like, whoa, like, Brett, I would see videos of Brett like doing this with his hands, like tilting to the note and feeling to the mix and whatnot. And that's when I first sort of like experimented the mix, even though it would go up to like an E4, and then by the time I would go to an F4, everything was off. Like, literally, it wouldn't go any higher, right? So I was like, so is this a mix or what? And I was confused. But I would try to sing on those coordinations, obviously after working with a lot of nays, moms, bobs, geeks and whatnot. Excuse me. And after doing that, I started working a little bit on phrasing and songs, because that's also something I ignored, which is probably my greatest mistake. Because, like, in my opinion, I think most guys get upset. That's like the only thing they want, just want to hit those high C's, B's, and A4s, And I think that's actually a very bad thing to do, because it's like a lot of people, like, the people that I'm currently actually helping out, like, they literally have no musicality in them. Like, they cannot even sing a small phrase. It's like when they sing it, even if they're hitting the right notes, it's like it sounds like they're speaking and not singing. You know what I'm saying? It's like they're literally singing the word. I mean, speaking the words, my bad. And it just sounds off. And, they're like, what am I going to do? It doesn't sound good, And I'm like, oh man, that's a tough one. And and so eventually I started playing around that, the C4 to E4 area. I was really started working on with songs, working on my phrasing, my diction, the accent and whatnot. And it just sort of built over time. And then eventually I actually sort of found my release in C4 before I found my head voice coordination. Because with my vocal condition, like, chord closure is a major issue, like literally major issue. And I'll tell you a little bit about my vocal condition. So what happens is that as you try to close the chords, the muscles above the the vocal folds, the supraglottic area, so supraglottis or supraglottic area, like there's this muscle, posterior cricoid rhythmoid, and that muscle is supposed to abduct during phonation, but it adducts. So it's doing the complete opposite thing, and that causes all the constriction. It's like it gets tight like that, and whenever the tightness happens, my speaking voice gets very breathy, and it's not natural to me, right? Because like what's also interesting is that I developed acid reflux back in like 2007 or 2006, so I was like pretty young back then, and eventually my voice got really breathy, and nobody realized that, and even I didn't realize that, right, until I actually started singing. I was like, maybe I feel different, because once I started singing, I started noticing more closure in my speaking voice. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm noticing more closure, more clarity in my voice, because like I would talk like this and it was very breathy. Now, some people do have breathy voice because they have a little bow in their vocal folds, right? When they vibrate, they have that little gap. But for me, it was not the case, right? Because like I did do a laryngoscopy and it was not the case. So yeah, eventually, so I started working a little bit on my talking voice, my speaking voice. That hey, talk with a little bit more twang in it, a little bit more word closure, and that was actually helping developing my voice in a sense, because I noticed that people who has a very clear voice can sometimes sort of get into their mix, sort of like not not like hitting B fours and A fours, but they can sort of get into that coordination. And what's interesting is that I actually tested that with a couple of my family members, singers and whatnot. And I noticed that a lot of people, like we talked about the split of resonance, right? When they don't get that split of resonance, it's just it's dull. Like you can hear that, even if you don't hear it in a recording, you can clearly hear that live, and it's just different as opposed to a split of resonance yell. If I would say a yell like hey, like that, and if you can hear the split, there's a difference there, And if you and once somebody can get into that coordination, the voice just keeps on getting better, developing. You understand more about the voice, and it just keeps on growing. But if you cannot get into that place, or if you have a very underdeveloped or weak voice like I used to have, that can be quite frustrating, and it can take from several months to like couple of years perhaps. So yeah, it's
Okay.
been tough, man.
um, I like what you said just earlier on about this idea of when you started, you're at one point, and actually what you found is at a certain stage, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this happened to me, is in fact, let me just frame it with my experiences. When I very first started, I thought I could sing kind of high because I could kind of get like to C5, maybe C#5, like not in any nice type of sound. It was just pure yelling, and it was either totally disconnected or it was like just totally like
Yeah.
so. And I was having to work like an absolute maniac to get there, but I thought like, oh, okay, I can sing pretty high. As I got into all this, like my range actually, and this is the opposite of what people often assume. You look at a lot of the programs, the way they kind of market themselves is, oh, extend your range, like gain an octave in a week type thing. I found the opposite. When I started, my range went from that, like over a period of about 6 months to a year. I started to realize, like, okay, where am I actually yelling? Like, and I would just gradually over months, I was going down, down, and down, and down. Eventually, I got back down to like C4 area, and I started to realize, okay, basically anything above that mid range, I'm yelling, and so I had to basically start from there.
Yeah.
So my range basically, I lost an octave over that first year, and then I started to build from that spot, which and I've actually built it up incorrectly like numerous times, to where like I'd build it up again, and I'd realize, okay, I'm not yelling as much as I used to yell, but I'm still yelling, and that went about at least 5, 6, 7 times where I thought like, okay, now I'm singing high again. I was like, right, I've got it now. And then I was like, eventually I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm still yelling, but I'm just yelling less. This is the thing, like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
There's a degree.
yeah. There's like degrees of yelling. I've spoke about this in videos numerous times, but the
Yeah.
hardest thing is actually sometimes to get like into their true mix where there's absolutely no yell and it's completely balanced. Some of the hardest people that find to get that are singers who are like maybe like 5% off of mix, like they're yelling like just a tiny bit, like maybe through their second bridge or through their first bridge, and it's like they can get away with it and they can actually sing shows, like, you know, night after night, and they might find after 2 or 3 shows, like they start to lose their voice, it starts to hurt, and they're like, man, those singers, it's really hard for them to get away from the yell, because the difference between yelling and a true mix for them is like tiny. Whereas for me, the difference was so big that in a sense it was like easier for me to find, because it's like I knew I had such a bigger amount of comparison. So, and I found like some of the singers who struggle to really get into true mix, it's like they're so close that it's hard for them to distinguish between the mix that's going to be like able to do day after day after day, even when they're not feeling great and their voice isn't feeling great, versus the kind of almost mix where it's like just a little bit biased towards the mouth, but they can kind of get by. This is hard, man, to distinguish. But as singers develop, they inevitably get to that point where it's like they'll be yelling like maybe like 5-10% of the time, and they can get away with it. It's really hard to go from that point into never yelling. I think back and like think about when I thought this, and then eventually I was like, okay, like it's like I'm almost there. Brett talks about it like this a lot of the time, where he's like, there's a difference between right and almost right, and learning to sing better is learning to distinguish between it being almost right and right. And this is something that, you know, you can read hundreds of forum posts, you can watch tons of videos, but the only way you're really going to learn it is like you do, which is the main focus of your learning, is actually getting into the trenches and feeling the differences and trying to like actually filter through the skills in your mind and actually doing. This is what I love so much about a lot of your approach is you're just doing it, and you're actually learning from doing, and that's first-hand experience. And that to me is the best experience you can get. A lot of singers, they rely so much on external sources. So, you know, they'll just parrot and repeat what coaches are saying, and they'll kind of do stuff, and they won't really think about what they're doing with their voice, and they kind of just think, well, I know what I'm talking about, so therefore my voice is going to be great. Versus what really should be happening with singers is first-hand experience should be their primary source of information. And then from there, maybe use other coaches to, you know, pick away at and supplement some of that information. That can certainly help. But your primary source of information as a singer should really be yourself, what you're doing, what does it feel like when I do it this way versus that way, and how can I, if it feels better one way, how can I work and practice enough that I always get it in that direction more. This type of thinking is going to like send singers up and up and up, versus like, okay, I need to find another coach who's got better information, because, you know, this coach is obviously rubbish because I'm not figuring it out with him. It's like, well, and me and Marnell spoke a little bit about this when we did something like this, and he was saying a lot of singers, they make a lot of progress that they're not aware of, and then they happen to kind of hit this sweet spot where they've made enough progress, and they find a coach, and all of a sudden it comes together, and they kind of link all of that progress to that coach. And it's like, yeah, but it's really hard sometimes to notice all of those little incremental changes that you might have made before that. This is why I talk about, you know, it's got to be in here. You've got to figure it out for yourself, and then find people to help you. If you can come at it from this way, you have such a better chance of success than just drawing from loads of sources and kind of just hoping that it's going to work, because it won't. Ultimately, like, you've got to grow the connection between this and really develop that connection and make it efficient.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, because like a lot, like, you know, the people that I talk to, right? I mean, they are so dependent on knowledge, but they do like this work amount as opposed to like this. Like, they have this kind of knowledge. People, like, you know, today's generation, like, you know, kids today's generation, like, you know, who are trying to learn to sing from the internet, it's like they get obsessed with the knowledge part, but they don't apply it in their own voice. And so it's like there's like a huge imbalance, you know. And it's like, you know, you ask them any questions about the voice, they can answer it, but they cannot demonstrate with their own voice. And then I'm like, hey man, I mean, when you're going on a concert, or like if you're gonna perform on a stage, do you think that the people are gonna be curious about what a mixed voice is, or what overdrive or CVT curving is, or are they going to be interested into more of your actual singing? Obviously, it's the latter because they're going to be interested in the singing because that's what they want to hear. And if you cannot do that, then it doesn't matter whatever you say. And this is sort of I personally developed like as a singer myself because it's like if I see someone giving an information and if they cannot like do them with their own voice, if they cannot demonstrate, I just don't sort of I don't like to take informations from them. It's sort of like what Ken Tampling said: the proof is in the singing. And it does make a lot of sense because it's like if you cannot demonstrate what you're talking about, even if your information is genuine, it's not. I'm not gonna believe that much since you cannot actually apply that in your own voice. So why am I gonna listen to that, right? I sort of go from that perspective. And yeah, so it's like people just have to really experiment with different sounds because it's like every single exercises it's like people say that I'm doing moms, I'm doing bubs, gugs, nays and whatnot, but my voice is just not going anywhere. And then you actually hear them doing it and they're just approaching the voice from such a way that they're either killing themselves or they don't have proper vocal. It's like there's like a very imbalance between vocal cord compression and airflow. It's like there's that imbalance, because at the end of the day, it's usually about that balance, the balance between airflow and compression. And if you can balance those two out, you are gonna be in a beautiful mix, and you can add twang to it. You can lower the larynx to get more of like a classical sound, and it's just gonna be there. And even finding that balance is so difficult, and that's what we are all sort of striving for in a sense. And that's sort of what I'm like going for at the moment, right? So yeah, balance is important. Balance is very important, and people should really work on finding that balance. Really work with different sounds, and it's like as I was saying that an exercise, for instance, if I say nay can be done like nay. It can be done nay. Like it can be done in so many different ways, or nay, different types of compression. And a lot of people don't realize that they're like, I'm doing it, but then you hear them nay, they're doing it like that. So it's like, oh, dude, I mean, how are you going to develop compression if you're doing it like that? You're literally going into falsetto, and they're like, no, I'm not. They think in their mind, it's like they're hearing that, and they think that they're in full voice, or let's say mixed voice, but they're actually not. They're letting go of that TA engagement a while back, and it's just never going to work. And they keep on going further, they lean on that, and that's a problem. And I used to do that too. From like I'm telling this from my own personal experience, is that I used to lean on falsetto, which was really bad. And I'm talking about the disconnected falsetto, which will lead into nothing. And it was sort of compressing the chords in such a way it would actually hurt. And eventually it would wear out. And I was like, oh, maybe that's how it's supposed to be done. Because I didn't have a teacher to actually give me feedback. I learned from trial and error. So it's like, I was going from, oh, okay, this feels right, this feels wrong. And I sort of like, how I got to that point was like, I just had to be honest with myself. That's what I had to do. I just had to be very honest. I was like, you know what, dude, it's just not working out. Go lower in the range, get that compression, slowly work your way up. And eventually, as the days went by, as the months went by, weeks went by, it started catching up. And then, everything started, glowing together. Everything started making sense. And, the videos that I did not find, informative or resourceful before, I went back to those videos again, and then I find it resourceful. Then I was like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. That's how it's supposed to be done. And once I sort of got into that level, it's like, as I was saying, that once I got into that sort of split of resonance area, right around that, D4, C4 area, right when I found that split of resonance, everything just sort of changed for me. Because that's when I feel like, oh, hey, you know what? It doesn't hurt anymore. And something just started feeling good, right? And that's when I feel like that's when I started hitting in sort of like the right direction. Obviously, there were ups and downs. I mean, that's very obvious. But that's when I sort of like took the right turn. And that's when my voice actually truly started progressing. Even in that video that I showed you earlier, you might think that I was sort of okay, but it was me who felt that, right? I mean, nobody can feel that. It was just horrible, dude. I mean, like words can't even explain how bad it was. It was really, really bad. It was pushy. Like even if you watch my videos from like a month ago, like you'll be like, oh, but it sounds the same. I mean, like, yeah, it sounds clear, it sounds free. But what the others cannot see is that I was putting a lot more effort to make that note versus what the effort that I'm putting into now, into making that sound. And a lot of people cannot see that. and this is where it can be sort of like discouraging or dismotivating, I guess, in a sense. Like I would try to sing Bruno Mars songs, right? And Bruno Mars songs are like second passaggio, male second passaggio, and like I would go up to like an A4, and I was like, okay, that's all. And then right around the B flat 4, everything would just fall apart. It's like, why is it not working? What's going on? What's going on? I mean, there has to be something wrong. I just couldn't figure it out. I would keep on going, and then I realized that. I mean, I'm talking from now a general perspective. Is that if you have a problem with a certain note, it's usually a couple of notes behind that note that you have to fix, and then you get back up. Because if you don't fix that, then it's just never gonna work. Hitting that note is never gonna work. I mean, like for everybody. And so like I went back to my E4 F4 and really started working on the vowels, working on the different levels of compressions and whatnot, different vowels and whatnot, different laryngeal placement, I mean larynx placement and whatnot, and everything started gluing together. I'm like, oh, okay, now I can actually sing with that. Because I remember about 3 months ago, all I could do was that twang sound, and that's all I could do. I could sing phrases, but it was just that bright. And if I would try to add more mouth resonance or chest resonance into it, it's like like I would lose that split of resonance and I would end up yelling, right? And it's like I'm back to square one. So I was like, that's not working out. And then I was like, hey, you know what? I feel like when I'm doing with the twang sound, I'm in full voice. Because the problem with the bright or pharyngeal or twang sounds is that when people do it, they actually let go of that chest weight or the TA engagement from the chord, so they get like a very that kind of sound, and they try to sing on that, and it sounds very comedic, and sometimes it might sound kind of loud, but it doesn't have that beefy quality that the chest voice or the TA muscles have when they're fully properly engaged, right? But I made sure that I had that because for my voice, actually, the spasmodic dysphonia, what it does is like there's a nerve called the vagus nerve, and the CT muscles, the cricothyroid muscles, are actually controlled by that nerve, and that nerve is actually messed up a little bit because, like, when I hurt my back, that nerve is a little bit pinched. So I think maybe part of that has to do with my vocal condition, but I haven't checked it out. So without a professional, I cannot confirm that. But that's what I sort of think, right? Anyways, so when I would do twang, right, I would make sure that I was really taking that chest up there, even though I was putting most of the weight on the pharyngeal resonator, as singing success would say, or the twang, and I would slowly try to work back, on the chest, slowly, and eventually, at certain point, it started getting better. Like I could get more mouth resonance there, and it started getting better. Like I got the E4s, the F4 was meh, the F sharp 4 was there really bad, and then eventually the F4 was there, the F sharp 4. It's like those notes are built gradually. You know what I'm saying? It's not like finding the mix. Like for me, it was never about finding, and this is what sort of pisses me off a little bit. Like I see all these videos on YouTube. They say that find your mixed voice with the wah wah with the baby cry like that. But the thing is that all of these exercises that they're showing, you have to be at a certain level in order to execute that the right way, to get the benefit out of it. If you don't execute the right way, it's just not going to work. Because I remember I watched this video, and like that guy would cry at a G4, and I would try to do that. I was like, oh, G4, I can do it. And I would just choke straight. It was just horrible. It was just a train wreck. And I was like really upset about that. I was a little bit depressed. Like, hey, maybe it's just not gonna work for me and whatnot. It was really frustrating. And I thought that maybe that part of my voice doesn't need work. So I started doing poo poo poo. And for some people, maybe that might work, but for me, it just didn't work. Like my weakest resonator, I would say, in terms of singing success, like they call the head, chest, the pharyngeal resonators. My pharyngeal was the weakest. And that sort of bridged the gap between the two for me, for my voice. And eventually, like, I started adding more chest into the sound, and then eventually started carrying more weight up there. I could take more weight or more chest sound in there eventually. And I just sort of developed more control over there. So, yeah.
One thing that you were saying that I liked was about how you learned to latch onto the right feeling. One thing that a lot of singers don't ask themselves enough as they're learning is does it feel better or does it feel worse? If it feels better to do, chances are it's closer to good technique. And something just as simple as asking yourself that question. Okay, if I do it two ways, which one feels better? Which one feels like it kind of just sits more like naturally or kind of is more in sync with my body or my voice. Like there's a certain type of feeling that when it's more balanced, it kind of just feels, it feels a little bit different. And the more that a singer can latch onto that feeling of it feeling more better or more correct versus it feeling like it's drifting off a bit, like that is a big shift for a singer. The other thing that you mentioned was about how you had, because you were doing it by trial and error, you had to be really honest with yourself about where you were at, and how am I going to learn what I need to learn right now to get to the next stage. I think this is something that I've struggled with a lot, but a lot of singers do, is really giving you an honest understanding of exactly where you're at with your voice. And when you start out this journey, if you're a struggling singer, that honesty can be very hard. I remember feeling like, before I got into all of this, feeling like I was a pretty good singer. And I would sing without really thinking too much about it on stage. And it was going badly, but I wasn't even aware of it. And eventually, I started to realize where I was at as a singer once I got into Seth Riggs and Brett. And I went from like where I thought I was to where I was. And it was a big old fall back down to reality. But I gave myself that shot to be honest and say, where am I at? And loads of times over the years, I've gained confidence and realized later on, like, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was right now. And I kind of took another fall, and it's always been like 3 steps forward, kind of, and then a step back. And over the last year or two, I've had that experience 2 or 3 times. Each time I do get better, take a little step down. And this can even happen even once you are singing very, very well. Your voice is still going to go through phases where you can't sing as high as easily as you can when the vocal cords, just by their nature, when you're a bit unwell, when you're a little bit under the weather, they are not as elasticate, they're not as stretchy as other times. And so you're still going to take those falls even when you really master what you do, but you start to be able to put those falls into perspective, and you start to really understand this. What I've found is the voice is such a great barometer in terms of it helps to keep you humble. No matter how good you get, you always take another fall, and you have to kind of say, okay, like, I'm not singing well, like, how am I going to get this together? And it kind of inhibits you from getting too cocky and confident, which
Yeah.
which is a great thing, man, because a lot of other things in life, when people have a lot of success, their ego can just get totally out of control. And I'm somebody who's kind of a bit up and down. I'll go from like a lot of confidence to like not much at all, and but it helps me to keep that balance, because without singing, I think I'd probably be somebody who could get either a little bit narcissistic or like totally like I'm gonna like kill myself. It's just like my nature is kind of ups and downs, but singing helps me to keep somewhere near the middle. And you'll notice that, like, if people like watch a lot of my videos, I go through phases where I get really quite cocky, and then I'll do a video where I'll be like, this isn't working, guys, and I'll realize, like, maybe I need to reassess this. I love that part of
Yeah.
the journey. I love that part of the journey, and that's one thing I've kind of picked up from you is like this sense of when you put yourself out there, you get a lot of feedback. You get good feedback and bad feedback. People say like, dude, you're not singing that well, and you'll get cocky, and then you'll kind of realize like, maybe I'm not singing that well. And then other times you'll be lacking in confidence. You'll put something out and people will be really positive, and you'll start to think, oh man, I'm getting somewhere at the minute. That relationship you have, it's not like completely accurate. When you put out YouTube's videos, like, you might put out something that's great and you don't necessarily get the feedback you should get, or vice versa. But it gives you a sense of feedback that if you're just in your room and singing and listening back to yourself, it's easy to get that, like you were saying earlier, that mismatch. It's easy to start thinking, oh, I'm doing really well here, or like I'm doing really badly, with no feedback at all. And you can get this from a coach, or just from putting stuff out on YouTube and figuring out where you're at that way from trial and error. But both those ways give you a sense of feedback and a sense of how, where am I at with this? What am I doing well? Where am I doing badly? And over time, you can you can really use that as a tool to learn with, because without that, you can so easily just get this massive mismatch. Yeah, doing shows like that's why I do my stream. You were saying earlier about Ken Tamplin and his his proof is in the singing type motto, which I mean I totally agree with in one sense. I mean, I will say that a lot of great coaches out there like Shelby and Brett haven't necessarily put that much singing content out, but they are some of the most skilled coaches in the world. Um, and
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily the case in my mind that it's always, if they can't do it or they can't put out amazing singing content that. But there's certainly a correlation. Like one of the reasons I put out my stream at the minute is just I want to get better, and like singing for live for 2 hours is just it's like you can't hide like and I think like in a stream recently you might have been there. I was just saying like about like when I started the stream over a year ago now. I was doing lots of streams. I went through like months of like nobody really being there, and my singing wasn't as together as it is now, and it was just tough. It was very tough. But through that, it actually has helped me develop a lot as a singer in the last 12 months. So the more really it feels bad, but the more that a singer can put themselves out there. And I've had coaches say like, yeah, you shouldn't be putting stuff out online like this. Like for many years ago, they would say this. And I felt like, well, yeah, I know what you're saying, but in the long run, if I just keep chucking stuff out there, it's going to help me get better. It's going to help me realize where I'm at. It's going to give me some feedback. It's going to help me grow. So in the long term, I'm going to benefit. Because if you don't start with that, even when you get really good, then you've got, okay, I want to do a live stream. Okay, so I've never done this before. Like, I'm really good at what I do, but then you've got to go back and start that all over again, because there's loads of stuff you need to learn when you're streaming, as an example, that you're not just going to learn in your bedroom. And so I think it's better just to get going with all of it and just see what happens and fail over and over again. That's how, in the long run, you're going to benefit more from that. It's what I like a lot about your approach is like, you're just putting stuff out there, see what happens and see what feedback you get. And in the long term, that's going to be the best strategy. Like in 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, a singer that's doing that is going to have much better results than someone who's not doing that and just in their room practicing. They're going to get better, but they're just not going to have all of that opportunity to really get all of that feedback, good or bad, and base their decisions on that. All sorts of great benefits to this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome,
And what's also true is that, like, the ability to take the constructive criticisms, because this is something that a lot of people cannot take. It's like, something just happened. It's like, even like I have encountered people, like, people emailing me, they're sending me audio clips or video clips, even on Snapchat, right? Like people are adding on Snapchat and sending me clips and stuff. And like you hear them and it's like, oh man, that's just not good. Now, how do I put it out? And I'm like, I asked them that, hey, dude, I'm gonna give some constructive criticisms. Are you okay with that? And they're like, yeah, sure, man, go ahead, do it. And then I go ahead and give them criticism. They're like, they just get triggered and they get mad and salty, and they started throwing out words and stuff. They're like, no, I'm doing it right. What do you know? Like, I've been singing for like 10 years. You just started singing, man. I mean, like, why should I take advice from you? And then I'm like, dude, I mean, you came to me for advice, man. I mean, what the hell, man? What are you talking about? And, it's just a train wreck, And, a lot of people actually sing, they actually approach singing from like a spiritual perspective, or like, improving their personality and finding, you talk about balance all the time, and sort of finding that balance, too much shy or like too much confidence, and there has to be that balance. And a lot of people sort of like sing solely for that perspective, which I totally respect, because singing, like, you are expressing, like, singing is all about expression, right? I mean, like, you're expressing through lyrics and whatnot, you're expressing emotions. And like for me, like, I would say I used to be a shy person. So, it was hard for me to like, put stuff out there like this. But, as I started putting out, videos and stuff, like I started getting, criticisms as usual. People would tell me that, I'm too nasal. And, I would argue that, no, I'm not being nasal, I'm being twang. And we all know that there's a difference between twang and nasality. It's just different. They're two different things. And, to some people, it might sound familiar, but it's not. right?
Depending on what type of style you're going for, some feedback you can kind of disregard some, and other feedback you take more seriously. Like I found that um, people will say a lot of time people so like for the kind of singing I do, for example, there are certain things that you don't need to worry about as much as with other styles, and sometimes people give me kind of stylistic advice, and I kind of have to assess it in the sense of okay, what I'm going for versus what the information they're giving me. Because there are a lot of singers out there, like Matt Bellamy's a good example. He sings quite pharyngally, typically, and I think if I was a singing teacher, quote unquote, giving him kind of formal advice, would I say to Matt Bellamy, you need to sing, with a more, a better balance between the pharynx and the mouth, and and sometimes I think you've kind of, if a singer's happy with where they're at and they're balanced enough and they're singing how they want to sing and it's free, there's got to be some sense of flexibility there versus where there's less flexibility, for example, would be musical theatre or classical. If you sing very pharyngeal, you're gonna have to change that if you want to be classical singer, or even
Oh yeah,
music,
absolutely. Yeah,
even
yeah.
musical theatre. The way I see it is classical. There's almost no flexibility. You got to do it one way, or it's not going to work. Musical theatre, there's some flexibility, especially
Yeah.
nowadays. With contemporary, there's a lot more, and I think sometimes people will come at it without this understanding. If you take Bob Dylan's a good example I talked about earlier, not earlier, recently in a video I did, mentioned him because of an
Yeah.
album he recorded. But he sang real pharyngeal, but he sang well. Like, would you tell him to change his technique? Like, it's free, people identify with it. So in that respect, sometimes I think, okay, I need to make sure I'm a little bit tempered with exactly what I listen to in terms of information. But then you're absolutely right. There's the other side of that of if everything's, especially nowadays, if everything's super jammed in the nose and someone's got no mouth resonance, okay, they got to have the ability to make different types of sounds. Because like you were saying earlier, once you get more of that meat and that mouth resonance coming in and you're able to control that, it's like another string to your bow. It's like another type of sound that you can lean on. And as you broaden out those skills, you'd never get into a point where I want to make this sound, but I've got to shy away from that because it's something I'm not comfortable with. And that's really when there's a technical problem that you want to address with the singer, is the reason they're not going there isn't because of a choice they're making. It's because if they do go there, they get uncomfortable, they grab, they do funky stuff. Versus a lot of singers who are a little bit further along, it's like, yeah, they kind of off center in a sense, but it's not necessarily because they can't do X, Y, or Z. It's a lot of the time just because they like leaning in that
Right.
direction. Some singers like to lean in one direction a bit more, as long as they're like roughly center, at least for contemporary. Like, I'm personally happy. But like we're saying, if you go musical theatre or classical, like it's going to be very different in that type of context. Just to kind of, I just wanted to fill out a little bit what you were saying and throw in my ideas of regarding that stuff. Have you got anything to finish up with? How do I'm calling you Fahimmuchi, but what should I be calling you? I should have asked an hour ago.
Only Fahim, like Fah.
Fahim.
Okay, yeah, that's my actual
Yeah.
name.
Sweet,
So
man. So Fahim, have you got anything you want to finish up with in terms of just bringing this to a close, or maybe some advice you want to give to beginners, just the best place for them to start, or anything like this?
yeah, I mean, like for beginners, like they should just the first and foremost thing that they should listen to is just being completely honest with themselves, because that's the only. I mean, like if they're not gonna take lessons, then they have to be like very very honest with themselves. But I would like, in my personal opinion, I think everybody should take lessons. It doesn't matter what level you're at. I think lessons will always help you to break that plateau that you're at and just get you to that next level that you've been trying for a while. And yeah, listening, I would say to beginners that record yourself singing. Don't get obsessed with the high notes because that will come later down the road. So work on your phrasing, your diction, work on make your own sound. At first, obviously, it's okay to like copy your favorite artist and whatnot, the way they enunciate the vowels and whatnot, their diction, accents, and so on and so forth. But record yourself and then hear back, and then try to figure out what are the mistakes that you're making. And if you cannot do that, go ahead, put it out online, like send them to vocal coaches for vocal assessment, or just send them to your friends who are at singing, or like are in music and in general, and they can sort of give you feedback. And I think that feedback is like probably one of the most important things, because like if you don't get feedback, if you don't know what you're doing, then you're never going to improve. Like people criticize me still to this day, and I take their criticisms, and I take it into account, and I try to apply that, and that's what's making me better, and that's what's going to make better everybody, right? I mean, like that's basically how it is. So yeah, I mean, feedback, being honest with yourself, and just putting yourself out there, because like that's one of the easiest way you can get better. And obviously, if you can afford get lessons with vocal coaches, and they can definitely help you improve. So
Yeah, this being honest with yourself and getting as much feedback as possible, and like you say, that's recording yourself, putting up stuff online, asking maybe family and friends where you're at, all sorts of things, or just experimenting a lot and feeling what's different, all sorts of ways you can get feedback. But that is in terms of balancing out the mismatch of where you're at versus where you want to be. Like that's what's going to bring that together is a lot of feedback and a lot of trial and error and a lot of honesty. And then because really when I found that I've developed the most as a singer is when the match between where I'm at and where I think I'm at has been pretty much spot on. And that is without the honesty, that's very hard to achieve. It's so easy for singers to either start with a big mismatch, or even if they have a mismatch, it can drift over a period of weeks or months. They don't even notice, and then they end up taking a fall. Now, as long as that fall isn't too big, most singers can deal with it. But if the bigger that mismatch gets, the bigger the drop is, the harder the ego is going to take it. So you get what happens with a lot of people is they get to a point where the fall they're going to have to take, the consequences of that are bigger, too big for them to deal with it. So they have to kind of come up with all sorts of rationale as to why they're at where they think they're at, and then at some point they get locked out of progress, basically. If you can just take little falls and lots of them, that's how you kind of gradually go up and up and up, because you will become imbalanced. It's a question of not letting that get too crazy and just being willing to take that fall each time. Then you can really build, because without that match, you get locked out of progress. This is where kids find it easy, because they have that natural intuitive match. They don't have any ego attached to how good am I as a singer versus XYZ, or how good am I, how skilled am I, can I hit this note, can I hit that note? None of that exists in their world. They're just like learning to walk. So there's no judgment, and because of that, the match is perfect. They have a perfect match between the ego and where their skill level is, and they typically learn that way. Adults, it's like that. Gonk, gonk, gonk,
That's so
gonk.
true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true, and I couldn't agree more with you on that. Yeah, because it's like the being of the state of being honesty. I mean, like even like like at sometimes like whenever you feel down, it's like you try to, let's say you're trying to go for a certain note, and you try. It's like, let's say you have that note, but then you're feeling depressed for some reason and whatnot, and then you're trying to sing that, and you feel like you're and that when you push for that note, let's say you're trying to sing to someone, or like that's when you actually mess up your voice a little bit. And if you continue doing that in that particular day, that can actually lead you a little bit backwards in terms of the progress, and that can be a huge bummer. So it's all about being honest with yourself, and putting yourself out there, and taking those feedbacks, criticisms, and implementing your training. That's how you're gonna get better. So
Yeah. Awesome, man. This has been great. It's turned out a lot better than I thought. I was a bit kind of thinking what we're going to talk about today when we started the call, but we've got some good concepts covered. I will put a link in the description to your channel so people can check you out, Fahim. And
Yeah, sure.
thanks so much for hanging out today. I'll look forward to watching your channel develop more. And yeah, it's been great to meet you. We've kind of been interacting via, you know, comments and all this in videos and streams and stuff for, I don't even know now, probably a year. How long do you reckon? It's been a while.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's been a year. Yeah, I think it's
yeah.
probably over a year.
Yeah,
So
so it's good to finally meet you, man, and interact. And I feel like there's so much crossover in terms of your ideas and what what I feel like is a great way for singers to figure this out, and how really in a lot of ways we're still, I see this match between our channels in the sense of we're kind of both just putting out stuff and seeing what happens, and over time the quality of the content gets better, and the quality of the singing gets better, and it's a great way to build up really from the ground up, because there's never been anything like this. Just to finish up, there's never been this document like of a singer's journey from the real start point to like developing over a period. I'm talking about a long period, like a period of a year or 2 years or 5 years. This website, YouTube, it gives learning singers or beginners, it gives them this gradual like document of how did this guy figure it out from where he started, how did he get better, like how did he put it all together. There's never been anything like that before. You know, if you pick up like the singing success course, you know, it's a great course, but there's no document of, you know, where Brett started and how he learned, like through a period, you know, and weekly updates of all this. And that is like a new thing. So this is why I think it's such an important thing, because, you know, in a decade's time, in 50 years time, assuming YouTube's still there, people will be able to go back and say like, how did this guy figure it out? And they'll be able to draw from that. And it's not something that's just been written in a few chapters in a book, or, you know, a brief, you know, 1 hour DVD. It's like this gradual shift that somebody can really kind of link up with and feel the smaller, kind of more nuanced learning parts that a singer has to go through, if that makes sense. Bit of a butchered sentence, but you get the idea. So this is why I think it's so valuable, because like we're the first people to do it, the first people to really document with video this journey. You know, and before us, you know, some people figured it out, but the typical value about singing has been you either got it or you haven't. And people like us, we're documenting this story of actually like you can get good at this. And here's the proof. Go watch this video I did today. Go watch the video I put up 5 years ago. Look at the difference. Follow that journey, and just like, you know, bang, there you go. It's proof that it can be done. Awesome, man. I kind of just wanted to finish up on that because I'm super hyped about this. Right. I'll catch up with you soon, Fahim. Thank you for today, and we'll kind of finish up there.
yeah, yeah, sure, man. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have anything else to add here. So yeah, let's end this conversation, I suppose.
Sweet, man. We'll maybe do something again like this in a year or something. It'd be cool to do this again. I'd be super keen. So we'll definitely see where we're at going forward.
I'm looking forward to it, man. Talk to you later, man. Peace out.
Awesome, man.